Catholic Education Sandhurst acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
In this episode of Catholic Education Matters, host Kate Fogarty is joined by Elena Pasquini Douglas, founder of Knowledge Society and a passionate advocate for bringing research and evidence to the forefront of education reform. Drawing on her experience working with leaders in education, health and government, Elena reflects on what it takes to move from good intentions to meaningful impact and why Catholic schools have a unique opportunity to lead the way. Together, Kate and Elena explore the difference between high-performing and improving systems and what we can learn from them, the role of school leadership and teacher expertise in student achievement, why learning to teach better is a system-level responsibility, and how Catholic schools can live their mission by embedding evidence in every classroom. Whether you're in the classroom, in system leadership, or simply passionate about improving outcomes for every child, this is a must-listen conversation about purpose, reform, and the future of Catholic education. Now join us as we explore what truly matters in education. So welcome everyone to our next edition of Catholic Education Matters. It's great to have you with us. Today I've got Elena Pasquini Douglas with us from the Knowledge Society, and Elena's been a great friend of us here in Sandhurst as we've sought to bring together Magnify Sandhurst, and has been a real wise person walking alongside us, helping to think about the way that we could put Magnify together and how that has evolved over time. So Elena, it's just wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Elena, you're with the Knowledge Society, and a lot of us know a bit about the Knowledge Society, but we might just go back over that in a moment. But before we do it, can you just talk to us a little bit about yourself and what it is that brought you into the world of educational reform, educational improvement, and how Knowledge Society grew out of that?
Right. So I'm an economist by training, and my immediate work just before starting Knowledge Society in 2015 was setting up the Centre for Social Impact at the University of Western Australia. And that's where I learnt about entrenched disadvantage. I mean, I'd always been interested in that topic, but really got deep into key communities in Australia that experience entrenched disadvantage, and how important it was that we designed social improvement initiatives well. So what I learned a lot about was social innovation, implementation science, and how if you want to make change at scale, you have to get the design right. So that's really what led me to establish Knowledge Society, because using knowledge and evidence to inform design for social improvement, that's the sort of nexus there. And one of our first partners and clients was Catholic Education Western Australia, which at the time was headed by Dr. Tim McDonald. A key moment in our journey, we were at the time doing innovation labs and social design labs for all sorts of different clients in insurance, in other fields, in not-for-profits and in education. And we were doing our process, which was to master the evidence base and then do the lived experience and then do the design. And we came across this huge body of education literature and the evidence of what had worked around the world to improve learning outcomes, and locally the work of people like Pam Snow and Lorraine Hammond in the science of reading and the science of learning. But we realised that this wasn't being covered in any depth in any of the teacher training courses, and we just couldn't believe it. We thought, but this is gold. This is how you make classrooms effective. This is how you make schools deliver on the promise of education. Yet people aren't taught this in their degrees. What on earth is going on? So it was just a massive moment. And gradually from that point on, I guess we started doing work in all sorts of different sectors, but it just became more and more apparent to me that, and my friend at the Mornington Peninsula Foundation, Stephanie Exton, said it really well the other day. She said, Eleanor, it's as if we taught teachers right and we had our schools operating as they thought we wouldn't need as much welfare and other interventions. If we just got schooling right, we would close the equity gap. And that's been our sense of what's possible ever since. And I guess the next step was we got the opportunity after working with Tim McDonald to do some work with Ross Fox at Catholic Ed Canberra Goulburn. And it was the Knowledge Society team that designed and curated with Ross and his team the whole Catalyst program. So that was another breakthrough because no system before that had said, okay, we as a system need to fund the design and bring together all the components needed to get a classroom practice change program underway. You might remember Ross's line as always, the teacher is the most important learner. So in Catalyst, it was all about what is the professional learning, the knowledge, the coaching, the curriculum resources, the program resources that are needed by the classroom teacher and the leadership team to get every classroom. Ross used to say he had 1,000 classrooms, and to get 1,000 classrooms changing their practice. So Catalyst was a fabulous experience, and it's had a big impact, but it's also received a lot of attention. So they're the big steps, I guess, in the Knowledge Society journey that bring us to our work with Sandhurst.
Thank you. And as you know, Catholic Education Canberra Goulburn were a tremendous help to us here in Sandhurst as we built out what Magnify would be. But if I can take you right back, I think it's really interesting to us in education when people who aren't in education come to an aha moment about who we are. And we're watching across all of the sectors here in Australia, more and more people from outside of education, not only having, something to bring to what we're doing, but actually knowing some of the research and the data and the examples from around the world better than we even do in schools and in the different sectors and the organisations such as ourselves here in Sandhurst. So I'm curious about back at that time where you were back with the Centre for Social Impact and, you were looking into a number of sectors but came to education. You talked a little bit about noticing that there's evidence for particular practices that weren't being picked up. What else was it you noticed about education at that time? What were some of the things that you were thinking, wow, this is ripe for change, or perhaps, oh my goodness, that's the best thing since sliced bread. There's something really good happening here. What was it as someone from outside the system you were seeing in education in Australia that was providing green shoots, but also making you go, gosh, that's just, wow, I would not have thought that was happening in the Australian education sector?
So I'm going to start with the good thing. What I loved about education and could see immediately was the noble purpose and just how much more meaningful and joyful it is to work with a noble purpose like informing the next generation, forming the next generation, allowing the next generation to be knowledgeable and lifelong learners and take their place. I'd spend a lot of time in other sectors, and it's a gift to be in a noble purpose sector. So that was just so wonderful. The surprise was that I'd been working in a university context for 6 or 7 years. And the promise of the Australian University is we will teach the students in all the courses the up-to-date knowledge and information that will allow them to be outstanding professionals in their field. So the sense of betrayal that I felt on behalf of the country's universities to the country's teachers, I just couldn't believe it. That it was like it actually gave lie to the promise of the modern university. And yeah, that was a total surprise. And the second thing was the fact that having observed really high, I guess, large whole of country companies like Bunnings or those sorts of companies that are trusted brands in all communities, and what they do to get something developed and then out everywhere scalably and repeatably is they have very sophisticated multidisciplinary teams who all bring different pieces to the puzzle, and then it's rolled out. And I found it really interesting in education how a lot of the management workforce in the offices, in the Catholic education offices, were former principals, and that's it. So you had largely a group of former principals without a lot of consulting or other external expertise trying to do what Bunnings does. And I thought, right, that's not the right mix. You need outsiders who've solved these technical problems, like how to change an entire workforce. So in WA, that's a big thing because safety in mining and oil and gas, that's massive workforces and, high stakes environments. So this sort of stuff is part of what people learn in the non-education sector. So, I sort of had been exposed to that type of work and could see the gap between how the in-education office staff thought about the challenge and what they brought to it was some of the jigsaw pieces, but not all.
Yeah, thank you. I think two really important reflections there and two things that perhaps we have been late to the game in. Firstly, around that pre-service teacher training and really holding universities and ourselves in the education sector to account around what is the best evidence for what is going to improve student learner growth and what are the programs and processes that need to sit around that have demonstrably made that an easier thing to do. Accepting that actually is a knowledge base and a skill set that our early career teachers need to be not just exposed to, but, really taught deeply in is still something we're grappling with. And all of us in the school system know, depending on which university you come out of, the training that you've done, the knowledge base you've been exposed to, the degree to which you're aware of what research is out there and influencing current thinking in terms of system building can be absolutely poles apart. So thank you for drawing attention to that. And I think it is an ongoing battle for us here in education to really keep reflecting back to our universities and to those in government who make decisions about these things that the initial teacher education courses, we all need to stay on top of those and we need to hold those courses, those universities, those lecturers to account around what is actually being practiced in schools and what we know is best practice around student learner growth.
Yes. And I'd just like to add, though, this is something I learnt from the Ambition Institute and the colleagues in the UK, and particularly a report they had done with Vivian Robinson, that where I said that in the design of the system-led change initiatives, there was a lack of the multidisciplinary talent required to design the right, robust whole system change solution. In the what it meant to be a principal, I think it was the opposite. There was far too much focusing on principal as CEO, like a generic leadership, rather than an education specific leadership. So where the principals should have been framing, that's what the shift that's underway is principals being experts in instruction and what is quality instruction wasn't something, or experts in what's happening in the K-2 literacy classrooms and in the primary schools, and experts in whole school curriculum improvement, which is all education specific knowledge. They were being taught to be transformative leaders as if they were CEOs of generic companies rather than of education institutions. So it's really interesting about, getting horses for courses and understanding the purpose of each piece in the jigsaw and which expertise and knowledge is required to be mastered by each different group in the mix.
Yeah, I think that the report from the Grattan Institute that came out last year on multi-school system really democratised across Australia the thinking around what it is that systems can and should be doing for schools so that principals and senior leaders' workload is cleared up so that they can focus on learning and teaching. Because, as you say, too often, and having been a principal myself, the breadth and depth of expertise that is being asked of people in that roles is quite extraordinary. In fact, some would say impossible to actually be right across. But now with the advent of systems here in Australia, similar to some that are happening in other parts of the world, where central teams are taking responsibility with much more clarity, as you say, scaling up repeatable processes from the centre. from central teams so that school staff, school leaders can focus on what's happening in classrooms, how wellbeing's looking for the students in their care, what are the social factors upstream in their community that they can be having an influence on, so that when the children come to school, when the adolescents come to school, there are true and honest, purposeful partnerships with government agencies or other organisations in the community. That means you get bang for buck when you walk into that classroom. Every child, every student, every day is getting their hours worth of learning for hours worth of sitting in that classroom. That is a real mind shift and work shift for us in education in Australia, and I can see is gaining momentum across each of the states in a range of different ways.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So let's, look at some of the other areas in this space that you've gained some experience around from being in conversation with some pretty wonderful people, but also you've had a pretty special bird's eye view into a number of school systems and into a number of success stories within schools. I'm wondering if you could just talk us through what are some of the big leverage items that you have seen that really have led to enhance student outcomes. And when I say student outcomes, of course, I mean academic outcomes, but I'm also looking at, well-being outcomes, spiritual outcomes, sense of purpose outcomes, career prospect, physical outcomes, the things that you have seen both internationally and here in Australia that are really high leverage things that we can be doing to improve student growth.
Yes. So the first thing I want to say is that it's knowledge that matters. Knowledge is what we think with. So I think sometimes in the science of reading and science of learning movements, we get a bit stuck on the technical and not the procedural, the practice. But we can't forget that the whole purpose of all of this is knowledgeable students. And we need to put our immediate focus on, like, to me, and I got this from Amanda Spielman, who was the former His Majesty's Chief Inspector in England. She says a good school is a place where everybody knows what the young people leaving that school will know when they leave and their point in that, what they contribute to that knowledgeability. And that a school needs to be very clear, have a whole school curriculum, a low variation curriculum, and a knowledge rich curriculum. So it's the knowledge that matters. But I think, Kate, the second thing I would say is it's the school improvement, which is where we bring it all together. It's the need to have a school improvement plan and then to implement the change in a realistic and well-paced sequence. So I think often people are not picking the right thing to start with. They've got the order wrong. I think also the first step with any initiative is to work first with the leaders and then making a plan on how you're going to work with the teachers. And a school improvement plan needs to span pedagogy, curriculum, assessment, and intervention. That's what we've developed from observing brilliant schools across Australia and across the world, the Australian primary school improvement sequence and the Australian secondary school improvement sequence. So we can help people pick the right things and do it in a kind of calm and ordered way rather than overwhelm schools and teachers and leaders. So they're the two things, knowledge and a holistic plan.
You've reminded me that when we were putting Magnify together, it was actually a conversation with you that changed our sequencing quite substantially. We had been planning to roll out literacy and numeracy interventions pretty quickly and to then move into some other subject areas and some instructional coaching and things like that. And it was you who drew attention to us. We had put a behaviour curriculum right at the end of our plans, in year 3 or 4, I think, some way down the track. It was you who pointed out, actually, if you can't be assured of calm and ordered classrooms, then all of this other work that you're doing is not going to land. And thank goodness you did say that, because when we took it to principals later on, as you say, to test, had we got the sequence right, had we got the timing right, it was them who then endorsed, no, actually, not only did they want it moved earlier, they want it moved right to the top, so that it was one of the very first things that we rolled out. And then once we got started, and in fact working with Classroom Mastery, to really build those programs with each of the schools so that they were picking up on the interventions that were going to make the most sense for them in their school community. That the schools who were scheduled to go later in that first year rather than earlier in the first year were absolutely banging on our door and saying, no, we want this as soon as possible. And we ended up moving the whole program earlier, which we were concerned would impact teacher workload and be too much for everybody, but in fact ended up reducing workload because it just created the routines and the practices that reduce that cognitive load that the teachers were carrying, reduce the cognitive load that the students were carrying, and just allowed the learning to really accelerate in a way that we had not anticipated. It was quite outstanding. So thank you for that advice. It really has made an enormous impact on the students, but also the staff across Sandhurst and the rollout and success at this early stage of Magnify.
I think this is exactly the point. The classroom mastery and getting your classroom management routines in place is really the gift that keeps on giving, because it gives schools and teachers and leaders such confidence that they can make change, because it's simple enough learning scripts and implementing the routines. It's simple enough that it's accessible straight away. You don't need too much knowledge. It's not like, improving year 3 to 6 reading and writing and literacy, which is so intricate that you sort of need your confidence up and you need your sense of mastery built before you tackle something like that. You're much better off having the whole school calm and ordered and all the teachers and leaders going, we did that. Wow, this place is so changed. It's so high impact that the collective efficacy is enormous from classroom mastery. And then that sets you up to like, what's next? Whereas if you do something too tricky first, you get the implementation dip and people go, oh, this is too bloody hard. And, it's that sort of thing. So I think that's the point of, we've studied who's done it best and then put it in that sequence.
I think as you're talking, I'm just reflecting, having just come back from a lovely visit to England and visiting some of the multi-academy trusts there who are just, maybe 5-10 years down the track further than Sandhurst, even Canberra Goulburn and some of the others here in Australia in terms of rolling out these systemic changes across a number of schools. And one of the things that really struck me as we were moving around those schools was something that we're already starting to see here, is that sense of collective efficacy that you just referred to is not just limited to what's happening within one school, but in fact is owned across a number of schools. And this idea that, not just what's happening down the corridor from me matters to me, but what happens across town or what happens, 3 towns over or 4 suburbs over or whatever it might be matters, because we are part of a community that is raising a group of children together. And where there is strength and giftedness or, great work happening in one particular pocket of the entity, that can be used to enable and support and increase the outcomes in another. And watching that really happening in a true to life form, where schools were reaching out outside of their own fences to other schools to share what they're doing well, but also receiving with humility practices from other places that were making a demonstrable difference in the lives of young people, was something that I think is really exciting for Australia and something we haven't capitalised on as well. We do have partnerships across schools around short-term things generally over, in a very particular area, but to understand ourselves as responsible for the whole of a group of students that are connected through the system they're involved to is a really powerful motivator, not just for staff, but also for students.
Absolutely. Education is absolutely social. It's about creating a shared language for a generation and between generations. So that's why we have texts that, you're inducted into a culture through the texts and the learning and the knowledge that you get access to at the different stages as you grow. It's the sacred inheritance, not just in the religious education, but in science, in maths, in geography, in history. You're being inducted into something. And, remember the old dictum, those who fail to understand history are doomed to repeat it. Because, Kate, what you're talking about there, we have to collaborate because we've got so much ground to make up. I think we need to be very mindful of what happened in education in Australia, the hard yards that you and other dioceses and regions and states are doing now is only necessary because of some of the decisions that were made in education, some of the big bets that we got wrong, and these accumulated over decades. So instead, we've had a couple of decades of choose your own adventure pedagogy, choose your own adventure curriculum. And the thing that's made me the saddest is the pressure we've put on primary school teachers and high school teachers. I mean, for example, primary school teachers, when you have that paint your own adventure system, you can have primary school teachers expected to plan 700 lessons a year. On what planet was that a good idea? And as the Grattan report and others have told us, it meant we've had a classroom lottery. So I think we have to pace ourselves. It's none of our fault that that happened. That's kind of one of these societal level mistakes. And we just have to, slowly and deliberately, and as you said, collaboratively, like sharing resources like OCA and other initiatives where it's multiple schools and being humble and saying, okay, we can't develop everything at our school. We're going to use this from somewhere else and good programs. So, that's just, I think, a really important point that how did we get here? How do we make sure we never get here again and that we can build out of here together?
So, Elena, what do you think's next in the Australian educational landscape? I mean, there's a doubling down on the work that's happening in so many school systems, government, independent and Catholic at the moment, around really using systems to make sure that the teachers and the leaders in schools are able to focus on the things that matter. But what are you seeing and hearing or thinking about that's coming around the corner for us?
Right. Well, firstly, I just want to name that I'm so thrilled that the rhetoric is all now in every state moving in exactly the right direction, in an evidence-based direction. I want to give a shout out to the great work Aero have done, being nationally consistent, working with every state, promoting that evidence base, and it's filtering through our state governments and systems. But I think what's next is that this need to plan the implementation. Like, I think too many states and systems are sending out documents that say, here's what good looks like, which is a huge step forward. It's a leap forward. But then actually how to get a school that hasn't had low variation curriculum, hasn't had consistent rules and routines, hasn't been doing cognitive load theory informed high impact teaching practice, hasn't been doing the instructional leadership, to suddenly go from, zero to hero requires, as you've discovered with Magnify, putting a whole lot of pieces together and then sequencing those and then supporting the classroom level implementation. So that's what I want to see happen, that people really work out exactly what they want to see in classrooms and then support, knowing, we call it in implementation science, dosage. What's the dosage of support that the evidence shows you need to provide a teacher to get them from practicing like this to practicing like that, and then giving it to them? Because I'm not saying you're an honourable exception and other dioceses are doing good things, but I don't think we've really had as a country the proper grappling with the how of making sure this happens at the classroom rather than just in the rhetoric. Because as you've seen, even to get the classroom routines in place, which seem like, and I've already said, are the simplest thing, that still needs coaching in the classroom. All your schools, we've been into 800 primary school classrooms and 400 high school classrooms to help get a high fidelity in the routines. That's what's needed to have it really work so the whole school becomes calm and orderly. So people need to get right down to this level of granularity. That's what I hope is next.
There are some awesome resources out there now, Aero, the state governments, just seeing these fantastic packs coming out. But you're right, they are descriptors to a large extent of here's what good looks like. And unless you have, the opportunity with other leaders and hopefully with some leadership to yourself, the opportunity to bring that together in a coherent way and to really think about sequentially what's going to work in my community, what can I learn from other places, how can we resource this in a way that's actually going to mean we get bang for our buck and we're not just, dropping something in and then running on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. All of this goodwill could very, very easily slide away because just seeing what good looks like is not actually enabling what good looks like. And we know, humans do take a long time to learn and for routines to become routines and habits. I think one of the things that I've come to be really interested in, and I'm hearing a little bit more in Australia, is this sense of the upstream issues and how schools can take greater responsibility. And I don't mean that in a burdensome way, but really increasingly see themselves as part of the solution for how young people come to the school environment. So really entering into purposeful conversations with local government and state government, really thinking carefully about who are the agencies, not just that we can invite in as one-offs or to work with one student, but who might have a very impactful role that they're playing in a town or across a few suburbs or whatever it might be, and be thinking about, well, what are the partnerships and the ways of being and the way that we can bring our expertise to those community groups or to those organisations or to those businesses or to those governments and councils and not-for-profits, so that those upstream issues are being attended to, because we know, the governments just don't have the resources that we would want them to have to be able to solve all the issues. And we know that all of the other agencies and organisations, we're all trying to pick off our own little parts of the pie of what it is that creates a healthy community for young people to grow up in, that supports families to be able to raise their child to the standards that they hope and aspire to for them, and to, enable them to grow into the best version of themselves. And then for us as the schools to play our part within that. We are only one piece of the puzzle. And coming to those discussions and those relationships with these other organisations with humility to be able to say, we want to be a part of these upstream issues and these things that are happening in our community, because we see the benefit it has not just to those at our school but also to the other schools in our part of the world. I think for me that's something that I'm hearing a lot about. I certainly saw a lot of it when we were visiting those other trusts in England, that they were asking similar questions. There's something in the zeitgeist, I think, about expanding our presence in communities, and particularly in rural communities, which is our area of greatest influence, to bring our skills and our knowledge and our capacity to the big things that are happening in a community.
Honestly, that is so beautifully put, Kate. One of the biggest things I think schools can do is to enhance young people's experience of belonging. So we do this in a number of ways. One of the sort of preventative measures where schools can make a contribution to the well-being and belonging of students, where they can make a contribution to mental health, anxiety, autism and ASD students. We've seen it, you've seen it, putting in those rules and routines to make the classroom environment entirely predictable, and that children and young people know what to expect and what's expected of them every minute of the day, changes lives. So that the fact that all the schools are doing the same rules and routines does create that sense of safety, but it also does create the sense of belonging. Tim Edwards told me a story about being at the cricket, and he was listening to these kids talking about the rules and routines that they're at different schools playing cricket. Oh, yeah, we do that. Yeah, we do cue to start. Yeah, we do. And just this lovely sense of we're all in it. That's lovely. But the other thing is, humans are story dwellers. We need stories to belong to as community, but as a nation, as a people, and that, some of the stories have their negative aspects. But that's the human condition, that there's light and dark in the story, but belonging to stories and having a common thread. This is the work of the great E.D. Hirsch and the really great knowledge-rich curriculum revolution. It's also about, we have to, as citizens, have a whole bank of the same stories and ideas in order to be able to communicate meaningfully with each other, resolve disputes, understand different points of view. We need a common language and a common canon. So this is the work that schools do. And in fact, some of us are really of the view that some of the mental health crisis is the individuality of everything, and the personalisation of everything is creating a crisis of belonging. Catholic schools in particular should be at the forefront of creating environments for community and belonging, and that sense of the common and the shared, and but all schools. So yeah, I'm very passionate about that, and I think on a personal level, so we've been working with Dr. Tim McDonald on Classroom Mastery, and now we have over 10 coaches who go out to schools and have worked with your schools and other schools around the country. But what the feedback we get is that there's just a peace and a calm and a belonging that is the result. A well-being is the result. So people think of behaviour that's so old-fashioned and discipline, but it's actually the opposite. It's sort of like what people need to feel safe and supported and to belong, and then they can concentrate on the learning. I mean, it's almost spiritual is how I experience it.
I couldn't agree more. When you hear story, you're on holy ground. There's no two ways about that. But I've been thinking a lot about the way that we express to our students and to our families. I'm glad you're here. Gosh, I love it when you're here. Yeah, our place would be poorer if you weren't a student here. And having you in my classroom, having you in our school makes us a better place. And, I've been thinking even about how we encourage people to just say that to each other, because we don't say it enough to each other. We can't and we shouldn't be saying I love you and those sorts of things, but we can say, I am just so glad you're here. It makes me better that you are here in this, whatever it is.
And Tim McDonald always talks about noticing when they haven't been there. If you don't notice that they haven't been there, or name that you notice that they haven't been there, they don't know that they are wanted and belong. So it's all those tiny, micro affirmations that create that sense of belonging that is an essential element to well-being.
To humanity. Yeah, absolutely. Elena, we've wandered all over the place there and we've covered a lot of topics. I just wonder, as we come towards the end, what's next for you? What are you thinking about? We've talked about education more broadly, but what's on the horizon for you and perhaps for Knowledge Society in the coming days, weeks and months?
Well, the first thing that's next for us is we've got the Australian School Improvement Summit, which we host every year. And this year it's in Sydney on the 29th of October. And it's going to be great. We've got Natalie Wexler as a keynote, who wrote The Knowledge Gap and is part of the Knowledge Matters campaign. Ben Jensen, Jenny Donovan from Aero, Lisa Holt from Rosebud Secondary College, and Jordan Hunter, and, all-star cast. So we hope you can join us for that. And what's next for me is founding a charity called 500 Schools to provide the complete Australian school improvement sequence to 500 low socioeconomic schools across Australia. So we've been delivering a school improvement program called Advance that the philanthropist Annie Fogarty and her family foundation donated to us in 2022. So they'd been doing it for 10 years when they gave it to us. And we've now combined that with what we've learned from doing Catalyst and working with Max and working with Magnify with you and with the 100 schools in Classroom Mastery. And we've put all those bits together to create the leadership program, the high impact teaching program, and curriculum improvement in a 3-year program. So we're just about to go out and get the philanthropic investment we need to be able to make this doable by 500 schools over 6 or 7 years. So that's a massive, exciting project that I'm going to lead.
Congratulations. That's the hard yards. That's wonderful work. Thank you for doing that and taking that up on behalf of, in advance, those 500 schools, but also all the other places and people that the children who experience that over time will touch, and the way their lives will be enriched and enhanced through that work. So, yeah, congrats. That's really fabulous.
Thank you.
the end of each podcast, Elena, we always ask the same question, and that is, out of everything we've spoken about today, what of all of that matters most to you or should matter most to the people listening into this podcast?
I think what matters the most is that you do all of this so that you can share the cultural and scientific inheritance of our civilization with the next generation. It's the knowledge. All of these other things are just so that we can give that to the next generation. Yes, so that's that. The knowledge matters, and you've got to make it as simple as possible to put all these hundreds of things in place so that you can successfully share that inheritance.
Thank you. And Elena, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing in that wide-ranging discussion. It's a real gift. As I said, when you're listening to people's stories, you are on holy ground. And I think, when you get to have conversations like this where ideas are just flowing and where possibilities emerge, that's a pretty special place to be. And it's a real pleasure to get to talk to you and to hear the energy in your voice and the expertise in what you have to say. You've been a gift to us in so many ways. So thank you very much. And hopefully we can have a chat maybe again in a year or two and just see how things are going.
Great. Congratulations as well, all of you at Magnify. It's been wonderful being partners.
That's it for this episode of Catholic Education Matters. Make sure to follow the show and share it with someone who's passionate about learning, leadership and community. You can also leave a review or connect with us online at Catholic Education Sandhurst. Until next time, stay with us as we explore what truly matters in education.